And we are back. Welcome, welcome, peace and blessings, family. This is another edition of the STEM Files, Diabetes and a Global Pandemic. On tonight's episode, I built with Dr. Uzo Mba. He's an endocrinology fellow at Scripps Clinic. For more of this dynamic episode, tune in after this. All right, again, family, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are the STEM Files, the voice of STEM talent in Black culture, where we highlight the best and brightest in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We are live every Thursday and Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Brilliant engineer Tariq Cardiac. Make sure you follow us on all our social media: Facebook, the STEM Files; YouTube, the STEM Files; and Instagram at the STEM Files for all updates. As we said, the brilliant engineer, I am a civilian mechanical engineer focusing on naval ship fluid systems with a background in material science and engineering. I am typically joined by my wonderful and awesome co-host, Tariq Muhammad, aka Tariq Cardiac. He's a biomedical research scientist with a background in biomedical cardiopathobiology, which is the study of how diseases form in the heart and other blood vessels. But like we always say, family, the show is not about the host. The show is about who we bring on. I could talk forever, but you did not come to hear me talk that much. So without further ado, I want to introduce to some and present to all Dr. Uzo Mba. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm happy to have, I guess, collective mentor, if you will, on. We always like to have, like you said, the best and brightest and those who inspire us to do what we do.
Oh, thank you.
So,
Thank you.
Doc, we were talking about before the show even started, and you have an extensive medical history with regard to your schooling, right?
Right.
And I would like you just to kind of go into a bit about your background as we get into some questions. Let us know who you are and how you've come to be where you are today.
Sure. So I guess a little bit about me. Grew up in the Washington D.C. area. Both my parents immigrated here from Nigeria in the late '70s, early '80s, and had the good fortune to do very well in school and be really well supported in a great environment that really fostered and nurtured the value of education. And so while in high school, I shifted my focus away from, well, not away from, but I shifted my focus toward, the health sciences, science in particular, but the health science generally and the health sciences in particular. And when I was I went to undergraduate at Duke University, where I was able to earn a Bachelor of Science in chemistry with a concentration in biochemistry. And from there, I did some work in clinical research shortly after college, trying to decide if, whether I wanted to do science or medicine. I ultimately chose both by matriculating to Virginia Commonwealth University, where I got a master's degree in pharmacology and toxicology, and then matriculated to the MD PhD program. So I got a combined degree, both my medical degree and PhD in physiology and biophysics, with a focus on molecular biology. And that's actually where I met Tariq, who I'm unfortunately, I know he couldn't be here, but, I was really excited to see, him doing well with you guys and having this podcast. It was really, well, not surprising because I know Tariq and he's, ambitious and well-spoken and, he's got all that stuff handled. But it was really edifying to kind of see you guys doing this kind of work and putting out this podcast and really trying to highlight us in STEM fields and uplift in that way. So it's very cool to see. But, but I guess to round out the bio in that regard, following my graduation from Virginia Commonwealth University, I got into a combined residency and fellowship program at Scripps Clinic, Scripps Green Hospital and Scripps Clinic, and it's actually out in San Diego, California. So I moved with my wife, and we all came out. Here, and I've been here since, working toward completing my medical education, and then learning to specialize in endocrinology. So currently, I am a licensed physician in the state of California who is learning to become an endocrinologist. Is the best way that I describe it to people. And so endocrinology, for those who are interested or are otherwise unfamiliar, is essentially, we look at the study of hormones and how it affects the human body. Really, and a lot of it has to do with diabetes, obviously, because that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today, I'm sure. But we really do those. But the hormones in your body really touch every aspect of your life. We have, we study the thyroid that looks at how your body handles energy. We look at bone diseases, so people who have osteoporosis and bone loss problems and other sort of rare diseases, because there are hormones that control that process as well. We look at issues about how people handle energy, folks with brain tumors. So it really covers the entire gamut of the body. It's one of the things that I love about the field, because it does touch every aspect of human life. And then the other part about it is that it's a very systematic field where, if these hormones are present in these levels, then we can expect this response. And, by figuring out ways to treat or manipulate those systems, we can bring people to better states of health.
Well, I'm a slow clap, because as I'm listening, I'm proud, then I'm focused, right? I told you I'm an engineer, right? So I'm thinking in steps sequentially. I'm trying to retain, right, and understand, and I don't have a medical background. Family, I'm going to tell y'all going to want to start to just answer the questions in the chat right now, okay? So,
Okay.
because as we move forward, it's going to get more technical, right? So you broke down endocrinology, right? It's so interesting because we're talking about hormones, right? And I find that interesting because you hear about people having things like hormonal imbalances and things of that nature. And I was curious, from your expertise and your background, what could be some roots for women or men when it comes to the diagnoses that signal things like, oh, you have a hormone imbalance, right? What are some different things that could draw from?
So, when we talk about hormone imbalances, we want to be careful about using a really general term, because a lot of times we talk about, hey, this person has a hormone imbalance, and it may simply be that it may be something as simple as they are not having, the best mental or physical response to naturally occurring hormones or cycles in hormones, especially when when we talk about women during their menstrual cycle, when we talk about men as they age, they're not having the best physical or mental really response to it, and sometimes that can be diagnosed sort of broadly as a hormone imbalance. But honestly, when we talk about imbalances in hormones and problems there, they can range from a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's you lose the capacity to make certain hormones because of an acquired disease. Sometimes it can be because of a cancer. Sometimes it can be because, of some other sort of infiltration inside, some inflammation or infiltration or autoimmune disease that can lead to a loss of these hormones. And so depending on what those underlying causes are, and a lot of times it can be driven, and they can drive certain symptoms that people tend to feel. And so as your physicians, as your endocrinologists, our job is to try to get a good picture of what's going on with you globally, and then try to pinpoint exactly where the issue is, and then try to find the best way to treat it there from there.
Awesome. As you were talking, you said a term, and I want to bring that out, unpack that a little bit more. You talked about globally. One of the things that I always found interesting when you talk about quote unquote Western medicine versus like naturopathic or holistic medicine, right, is you have a lot of specialists in Western medicine, right? Or I'm a somethingist. I work with the nose, I work with your bones, I work with your
Mhm.
ears. And, one thing I find, or I have found, right, is a lot of times, you know, you'll go to a doctor to find the reasoning behind some specific part of your body, and it will sometimes be derived from another part. So, can you speak to the
Mhm.
importance of not looking at the body as just a bunch of independent systems and think about it
Right.
very holistically and how things are connected?
Absolutely. And I think that the important thing to recognize is that all of your doctors, specialists or otherwise, they were at some point a generalist. They were trained as generalists. And then over time, they learned to focus in on a certain part of the body. And that can, that, that can over time, with some practitioners make them really sort of narrowly focused. But really, the importance of looking globally at somebody's overall health is really important because the generalist typically is able to kind of take a whole picture of the patient and say, okay, you know what, I can identify where we have these issues. And sometimes, a patient can have somebody can be suffering from, constipation and fatigue and depression. And, you know, those things seem like three different things, and maybe the
Right.
generalist can help with the fatigue. Maybe they send you to a psychiatrist for the depression. Maybe they send you to a gastroenterologist for the constipation. But a good generalist will know that, hey, if I check and see if they have a thyroid hormone problem, we can actually address all three of those with just
Mm,
one solution. And
right. Right.
so that's why, when we talk about looking at people globally, a good generalist will really be able to kind of take in that whole picture. Where the specialists come in is where the generalist and the good, well, I'll put it like this: a good generalist knows what to look for broadly and how to link symptoms up in his patients and how to understand that their patient is not a compendium of individual parts. But a great specialist knows what the limits of his or her expertise is. And that's where they refer to the
Mm,
specialist. So if a generalist will take you so far as to say, okay, you know what, I know I can do this, this, and this. But when it gets to that fourth and fifth step in your care, all right, you know what, I'm not entirely sure how to do all of the stuff with the heart, so I'm going to send you to a cardiologist.
right.
Not entirely sure how to do with everything that has to do with the bones, I'm going to send you to an orthopedist. So I'm going to send you to an endocrinologist. And then when it comes down to, oh, you need surgery, well, then I'm going to send you to the surgeon. And so, and don't get me wrong, I am I guess my ancestral home in Nigeria, the physicians there, they have to be all things to all people. They got to be
Mm,
all of it. And that is just how the medical infrastructure there is set up. But when we live in well-resourced countries like this one, we do have the opportunity to say, okay, you know what? A generalist can be sort of a primary contact and a point of care who can get you to a certain place to help maintain good health. And then when things get beyond their expertise, then they can send you to a specialist who can really help hone in, figure out exactly what's going on, and direct your therapy so that you get timely treatment that is effective and long lasting.
you know, I love what you said when you talked about basically knowing your limits, right? As a specialist or a generalist, it's like,
Mhm.
I know the limits of my expertise, I know the limits of my skill set. And what we have to understand is the patient getting back to or as close to optimum health is
Mhm.
the goal.
Right.
Not to be like, well, oh, I know X, Y, and Z, or I'm amazing. What makes you amazing is that patient feeling better.
Mhm.
Whether you take them from point A to point Z or from point A to point Q and somebody else from Q to T and someone else from
Mhm.
T to Z, right? It's
Mhm.
are we
Right.
prioritizing the patient and their well-being and putting them in the best situations and with the best team of physicians and specialists and generalists that allows them to reach optimum health. So I love what you said, and that's a principle that goes to business interrelations. You got to sometimes we just don't know everything, right? As a
Yeah.
parent, I'm not a parent, but obviously I'm
Yeah.
raised by two parents. Sometimes
Sure.
one parent doesn't have all the answer. You got to tag in the other, You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, how do you do this? Or as an engineer, right? I
Hmm.
might specialize in CAD or whatever. Somebody else specializes in Lean Six Sigma, right?
Hmm.
And I happen to need that aspect of things when I'm dealing with this program or this process to get it to the end, right?
Right.
I'm a basketball player, so it's like,
Hmm.
okay, I can dribble, but I need to hit my the open man for that jump shot, right? So we have to
Exactly.
all work together as a team to get to the end goal. So that was amazing. So
Absolutely.
I promised Tariq, like I told you, I promised Tariq I was going to make sure that we
Hmm.
tapped into the aspect, which is really kind of a big part of what this show is about, right?
Hmm.
So we're in a pandemic. We all know this, right? It's been over a year as it's been publicized,
Hmm.
and we know COVID has been deemed or studied as these series of symptoms that tend to be exacerbated when people have certain underlying conditions, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
one of these that's been studied is diabetes.
Hmm.
Now, uh, please unpack diabetes. What is it? What are the different types? And then what, why is that? Why are you interested in that, particularly as it is connected to the pandemic?
Oh, sure. So, diabetes, we use the term diabetes, but really the disease itself is called diabetes mellitus. And the reason why the distinction is really important is because diabetes mellitus, the term mellitus means sweet. It basically, back in antiquity, was diagnosed because your urine became very sweet, or the flow became sweet. So, diabetes, flow, mellitus, sweet. And so, that usually happens because the body is dealing with excess sugar. All right. And the reason why the body is dealing with excess sugar and an inability to process that excess sugar is typically because of a deficiency in insulin or resistance to insulin. And and colloquially, we understand that there are two types of diabetes. Now, I could get really into the weeds and tell you that there's really five, but what we're going to talk about is that there's really two types. There's type 1 diabetes, and type 2. And type 1, as we understand it, is typically an autoimmune condition that can hit people in childhood, young adulthood, or even later on in adulthood. But what ends up happening is that there is an inflammatory trigger or an overactive immune response that leads to your body creating antibodies that attack the cells in your pancreas that produce insulin. And what ends up happening is that over time, after that attack begins, over time, your body loses its capacity to produce insulin and leads to problems with excess sugar. All right, excess blood sugar, and your body ends up feeling, and whether you have type 1 or type 2, your body is in a state where it feels like it believes itself to be starving because it cannot absorb the sugar from the blood. And when it believes itself to be starving because it cannot absorb sugar from the blood, it leads to breakdown of protein for energy, breakdown of bones for protein and energy, and it can lead to very severe disease states. People end up losing lots of weight, urinating a lot. That can lead to kidney damage, nerve damage, eye damage, heart problems. But all of these are happen when it is uncontrolled. All right. And type 2 diabetes, again, also type 2 diabetes is a similar phenomenon in that your body loses a capacity to produce enough insulin to keep up with your body's need, or a state of insulin resistance. And, and that's insulin resistance can arise for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it happens because, of obesity. Sometimes it's simply associated with a family history or a genetic predisposition. Other times people see that it's associated with age, that your body's resistance or capacity to produce insulin decreases as we age. And then other times people develop, and other times people with type 2 diabetes simply develop a deficiency of insulin because they've been producing so much for such a long time that the beta cells, or the cells in the pancreas that make insulin, begin to burn out. And so lots of different reasons, but we combine all of those things. If we don't see that there is some sort of autoimmune attack on those cells, we combine all of those into the umbrella of type 2 diabetes. And ultimately, what diabetes does to people is that that excess sugar has to go somewhere. And so your body tries to find ways to absorb it, or it tries to find ways to get rid of it. And it can deposit in places that we don't want it to deposit. The lens of your eye, it can deposit in the epithelium of your kidneys. It can deposit in your blood. It can thicken and thicken your blood vessels and produce atherosclerosis and heart disease and issues of that nature. And so, so it has a lot of problems. But again, I should, with the caveat saying that all of these things can happen with diabetes, that is not well controlled. That is unidentified, that is untreated. And as it relates to, and how this relates to the pandemic is a couple of different things. With the COVID-19 infection, we know that one of the things that it does is that it can thicken your blood and produce a propensity for blood clotting. In patients with diabetes, they already have stiffened blood vessels, thickened blood vessels. They're less compliant. They're potentially laden with cholesterol. Those things can increase your risk for stroke, heart attack, in combination with an acute COVID-19 infection. Likewise, diabetes in and of itself can suppress the immune system. It makes it more difficult to respond to it. It makes it more difficult to respond to infection. It delays healing as well. And again, the caveat being uncontrolled diabetes can lead to all of those things. And so part of the reason why we look at diabetes as one of those pre-existing conditions that can potentially worsen the outcomes of a COVID-19 infection is because uncontrolled diabetes can worsen the outcomes of any infection. It can worsen the outcomes of any malady by being present when that malady occurs. COVID-19 is unique insofar as that when it first proliferated through our population, there was no treatment, there was no vaccine, and so there was no way to attack it. There was no way to attack it in any of us other than not to get it. And those of us who either knew people that suffered from diabetes or had it ourselves, were just more inclined to suffer dire consequences from it. So that, in terms of how those two relate, that's really where the nexus hits. Diabetes makes infections worse and healing slower, and the COVID-19 pandemic is simply a disease that we had no cure or therapy for.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
definitely a lot. A few things stick out to me, right? Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about susceptibility, right? Your
Mm-hmm.
inability to heal normally or at
At a normal
an
pace.
accelerated rate. So you're in a state of susceptibility for long enough for something else to come in, be introduced to your body, put you in a even more detrimental state. We have an interesting question from one of our audience members, Carol Johnson. I'm going to bring it up. She said, "Are you familiar with the AMA, Aboriginal Medical Association? What are your thoughts on the holistic medicine and the push to ignore dependence on pharmaceuticals?"
Well, I can't say that I'm familiar with the Aboriginal Medical Association. And as far as my thoughts on holistic medicine, I think that a lot of what we deal with, especially as it relates to, and well, I'll keep it to my sort of oeuvre, as it relates to diabetes, a lot of what we deal with is really lifestyle change. There's a good amount that can be done by simply, finding out those foods that are going to work well for you versus those that are not going to work well for you in terms of helping control, whether it's blood sugar, cholesterol, or any of your macronutrients that are imbalanced or out of control during a state of diabetes. We can do a lot of good work with proper diet choices, time restricted eating, and an appropriate exercise regimen. I think that reliance on those things can be really helpful. And I think that we have to be, I like to try to walk a line between talking about holistic therapies versus pharmaceuticals, because a lot of times when we look at pharmaceuticals, what they really are, companies, multinational corporations that have taken some root, some herb, some extract from plant or animal, and have essentially just purified and packaged it for our sale for the purposes of gaining large amounts of profit. So when we talk about, so there, we have certain types of therapies that are, supplements that are called supplements, or that are derived from citrus fruit, that are derived from the the berberiscus plant, that are derived from cinnamon extracts. And they don't have the same sort of power in terms of efficacy as sort of that purified form of those same things in a pharmaceutical package. But when taken in appropriate amounts, when combined with lifestyle changes, they can be as effective for a lot of people. But again, a lot of that depends on the individual. So I don't always direct my patients to holistic remedies, but I don't always direct them to pharmaceuticals. I try to find out what it is that will work best for their lifestyle and direct them in that, and direct them and try to support them as they pursue those initiatives.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I love how you think.
Mm-hmm.
As you're talking, I get a great sense of you take care to within your power.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, what is the best course of action for this patient?
Right.
I may not be 100% right, but I know at the end of the day, I've done my due diligence, or as much as I feel like I could have done, to point you in a direction that's going to be best for you. And I hope, Carol Johnson, thank you for that question. I hope he answered to the best of his ability, and you were satisfied with that answer. We talked about time-restricted eating, and I want to bring something out with that. Both members of the Nation of Islam, and in the Nation of Islam, we have a regimen called How to Eat to Live, which is a book the Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave to us from Master Fard Muhammad. And one of the cardinal points of dietary law is we eat once every 24 hours, typically between 4 and 6, or at 4 or 6, and we try to do it at the same time. The thought process, and I've been doing this for several years, whereas though everything you eat, everything you ingest, it has a natural toxicity in it, right? And as you allow the body to be, the word I want to use isn't still, it's I'll get it, but without food, right, for some time, it allows it to dispel and move from your body. And then I believe there's been studies showing that at least every 24 hours or more, your body starts to generate new stem cells. So when you talk about time-restricted eating, intermittent fasting, people are finding that, their health is increasing, but they're not eating all the time. One of the things for me, I've always found it weird. Oh, I eat 5, 6, 7 meals a day. I said, well, what else are you doing in that time? Like, that's a lot of eating. I mean, I just can't fathom. My thing is, I got too much to do to eat 6, 7 times a day. Like, I just feel like something's not getting about me that much time, and you're not allowing the body to rest. Like, the stomach can be worn out, right? That's a lot of work for your body, for your stomach, everything too. And what we find is that's one of the things where people, when you're overindulgent, right? We live in excess in America, supersize this and extra this and super salty this, right? So and obviously this, right? So caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, eating one meal a day. This is given to us back in the 30s. It's definitely been very effective with people when it comes to losing weight and keeping that toxic level in the body low, and just restoring your cells and creating positive apoptosis, if you will, to be able to move forward. So I definitely wanted to highlight that out of what you said. So I guess a follow-up question, again, me being more ignorant, is diabetes, both types, all 5 types, is it reversible? Is it not? Or is it just treatable?
So a lot of the I'll put it like this. To date, our knowledge of autoimmune diabetes, so the destruction of our body's capacity to produce insulin, that has not proven to be reversible. It's treatable, and it's getting to and in well-resourced areas, it's getting to be treatable in such a way that it's nearly automated. I think we're still probably about a decade away from having sort of truly automated artificial insulin production and control. That's still some time off. But as far as type 2 diabetes, or that sort of umbrella of type 2 diabetes, a lot of it depends on the underlying cause. For those of our patients who have whose diabetes is driven by their weight, you know, we have seen that dramatic loss of weight can lead to a reversal of that diabetes, and maintenance of that weight loss can lead to reversal of that diabetes. The best studies that have been done in that have not only been in patients that have had the condition called prediabetes, where their blood sugars are dysfunctional, but not to a degree of diabetes. We find that with a 5% weight loss, that pre-diabetic condition reverses and doesn't come back as long as that weight is maintained. For those of our patients who are very obese and also suffer from type 2 diabetes, there have actually been really excellent studies. I mean, it's an extreme, well, for some people, it may feel like an extreme solution, but, you know, the use of weight loss surgery has been shown to reverse that diabetes as well. And as long as the weight loss is maintained, the diabetes does not come back. Now, there are a lot of physiologic reasons behind it, and we could get into a lot of the biochemistry as to why that occurs. But let it suffice to say that when those measures are taken, you actually do change the balance of hormones between those that are designed to help your body utilize insulin and suppress the appetite versus those that don't. And similar things can be accomplished with pharmaceuticals, but the ability of pharmaceuticals to mimic what happens with that kind of extreme weight loss they're not up to par. And and on top of that, in terms of the reversibility of diabetes, a lot of it does have to deal with the fact that your body, when you suffer from it for a long enough time, your body does have a set point that it resets to. And there's a lot of training and a lot of work that needs to be done to reset that point. And what we do with pharmaceuticals makes it easier for somebody to sustain that, to achieve and sustain that loss. So the short answer to your question is most times, no, diabetes is not reversible unless it's very specific circumstances. The long answer, of course, is that it depends on the individual and the underlying cause. For some people who have, extreme insulin resistance because of a pancreatic dysfunction, for a lot of them, if the inflammation from the pancreas goes away, there's a chance that diabetes will also reverse as well. For some of them, if that inflammation to the area is chronic and it leads to the destruction of the beta cells, then no, that function is not going to be reversible. It will be treatable, and it's very treatable. In fact, this year is the 100-year anniversary of the discovery of insulin, and I use air quotes because it's to say it's really the manufacture of insulin for human use. Is how I'll describe it instead. But
Absolutely.
that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's fine. I just wanted to kind of, the thought that I wanted to finish out was that we all have to understand truly what the underlying issues are with our diabetes before we sort of dive in, because there's not really a one size fits all picture here. There are things that we have seen that work very well, and we could talk about the medications if anyone's interested or if we really want to. But ultimately, it does come down to individuals. It comes down to individuals and how their treatment should be tailored according to their lifestyle and their goals.
Absolutely. Lifestyle goals. We got to make lifestyle changes, family.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that sticks out to me. I feel like, as you hear news throughout this pandemic, there's a push for the vaccine, and it feels very oppressive at times, right? And sometimes I feel like there's a very lopsided reporting that's done when it comes to reactive measures versus preventative maintenance. For me, I feel like doctors and professionals, experts, it's like, okay, well, we have this vaccine now, wash your hands, social distance. But I feel like I don't hear enough about lifestyle changes, about things to eat, things to take in, things that are done that experts will say that vitamin D, vitamin C, liposomal or otherwise.
Hmm.
There's been studies on a therapy or a medication called ivermectin that people
Hmm.
have seen very good results from. What are your thoughts, very generally or as specifically as you would like, on the potential lopsidedness of the reporting and some of the other things that have been shown and or not shown in the news?
Sure, and I think a lot of it. And now, keep in mind, I'm not an infectious disease expert
Right.
of any
Yeah,
kind,
we were just talking. Yes,
but
sir.
no, but I understand that I've heard the same things. When obviously earlier in the pandemic, it was hydroxychloroquine that was understood to potentially prevent the virus from being able to enter the cells. And we know that aside from cleaning fish tanks, but hydroxychloroquine's also been used as a potent therapy for malaria in sub-Saharan African countries. And we had there are lots of different thoughts and reasoning behind what can actually be used to treat this. Thus far, I've seen studies, regarding the use of ivermectin in combination with steroids and vitamin D, to help with either the prevention or the treatment of active or mild forms of COVID-19. And the truth of the matter is, the the virus, because of the way the virus spreads and because of its capacity to infect a lot of people in a very short amount of time, um, what we end up dealing with from a prevention standpoint is literally, the lifestyle stuff that we've been talking about. There's not really been enough data to say, hey, you know what, if we take in vitamin D, if we take in vitamin D, vitamin C, if we use aspirin or ivermectin or things of that nature, that we can prevent infection. The most we can say with a lot of these prophylactic measures, including maintaining a healthy lifestyle, including trying to do your best to exercise, is that we can mitigate the suffering if an infection occurs. And a lot of what we do, in the absence of knockdown therapy, for us to say, okay, you know what, when you get the flu, if you show up to the hospital or to your clinic with a flu and they know that your symptoms have lasted less than 72 hours, you are going to get a medication called oseltamivir or Tamiflu. That is an antiviral for the flu. We know that it will shorten the duration of your flu. It will decrease the need for hospitalization. It will decrease the adverse outcomes from the flu. All right. To date, we don't have the pill form of an antiviral that is effective for COVID-19. There are infusions of monoclonal antibodies that help bind up the virus for people who have mild or active infections, and that can help. Of course, we don't publicize it as much because a lot of what's been happening here is really been driven by a desire not to overwhelm the medical infrastructure, a desire to prevent people from getting infected in the first place. So that's why you see the push for hand washing and social distancing, and why we've been be like laser focused and obsessed with the idea of vaccines for the better part of 6 months. And fair or foul, we end up in a position where we are not focusing on prevention, because the idea of prevention kind of goes out the window when 50,000 people are getting infected every day. When 1,000 people are dying every day.
Mm-hmm.
That the idea so the idea of prevention really does kind of come down to, okay, what can we do to avoid people getting infected, because it doesn't seem like we can simply say, okay, if you take in these things, you won't get infected. Now, if you do those things that are healthy and good for you, you're not going to suffer the same consequences as the person who's not doing those things. That much we can say with some relative confidence.
Right.
Those of us who don't have those pre-existing conditions,
Right.
those of us who maintain healthy lifestyles, those of us who have who have good diets and whatnot, if we get infected, we won't suffer the same consequences from it. A lot of it was, when we first learned about the pandemic, a lot of it was associated with age. And then a lot of it became associated with race. And, for me, I always bristled at that, because
Whole nother can of worms.
No, and I'll tell you, I always bristled at that because it's the same thing that I told anybody who would listen to me, which was that, you know, it's not, it didn't, COVID-19 doesn't attack or infect Black people more than it does anyone else.
Thank you.
What it does is that it exposes the underlying issues within our healthcare system that result in more Black people dying from disease. And that is what we were trying. And that I think more than anything is what was lost in that interpretation of that early data from the pandemic. And so
Oh man.
when we recognize those things, we recognize that not only do we need to try to prevent ourselves from getting this disease, but if we do, and if we have to go to the hospital, that we have to have people, whether it's family or physicians or whoever it is, in place to advocate for us as fiercely as possible to ensure that we get the
Yes.
treatment that we deserve.
Yes.
And in the midst of this pandemic, when my work did push me toward the inpatient setting and the front lines of all this stuff, I had to really kind of be mindful of all of that in the midst of treating patients and saying, okay, you know what? Are we doing everything that we should be doing for this patient? Do we have access to the antibodies that they could potentially use? Do we have access? Are they getting the medications that they need? Are they getting the supportive care that they need? And if they're not, why not? And
Right.
and especially in a position like this where we can't even let family members into the hospital. So, I had to deal with a lot of people calling, saying, hey, what's happening with my uncle, what's happening with my cousin, what's happening with my mother, my father, and it would be conversations about, okay, here's what happened today. Here's what we did. Here's what I think is going to be the best thing for them. And I've always found that the more engaged a family can be, even when it is offsite, even when it is remote, I think it leads to better outcomes because it does make your clinicians pay more attention. It kind of snaps them to it. It kind of snaps them into account because they know that their actions as it relates to that patient is going to be held. They're going to be held to account for their actions with that patient because there's going to be somebody who's always going to be sort of looking and pressing and kind of making. It's the same thing that happens in the hospital when visitors are allowed in the hospital. It's just happening.
Right.
It just was happening outside of it. That's all.
Absolutely. Family, we rocking out the STEM files, voice STEM talent in Black culture. Right, Joy Engineer, typically joined by Tariq Cardiac. We are live on Facebook at STEM Files, YouTube at STEM Files. Remember, family, we always are posting new content at the STEM Files on Instagram as well. I got Dr. Mba here dropping some major gems. Bro, that was a whole sermon. What you was talking about, when it talked about, oh yes, like, because the reporting is like, oh, Black people are more adversely affected by COVID. Well, why?
Right.
Right?
But why?
Is it because we're Black? Or is it traditionally we're underserved, right? Then we can talk about food deserts in our community. We can talk about how you can go to the suburbs, see Whole Foods, and you come here, you see Save a Lot, but we're not going to talk about that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's
Right.
we're going to keep that. We're going to keep rocking. And
Mhm.
you mentioned again, my mother always talked to me about this. My parents actually always talked to me about this. Self advocacy. It's the
Mhm.
same thing in schools. A teacher, right, who is used to the parents of the Black children not showing up to parent teacher conferences, not calling, not checking
Mhm.
homework, right? They
Mhm.
become a little bit more lax when it comes to that child's development, right? And
Right.
then, well, it's like, okay, well, they're the only one kind of having these struggles, or they don't turn their screen on during
Mhm.
virtual schooling. Well, my thing is, are you actually engaging, right? And then
Right.
as parents, right, you have to be your child's cheerleader. Again, you
Mhm.
got to come to bat. If no one comes to bat for you that loves you, people
Mhm.
who don't love you aren't going to do it more than you, right?
Right.
So what you
Right.
said was a whole word where you said, like, when it comes to these medical, physicians and these hospitals and everything, you have to know what you want, know your rights, understand that you are to be treated in a certain way. My mother's a doula. She deals with a
Mhm.
lot of mothers and the children and everything. They have their birth plan and all that stuff. And she said,
Mhm.
oh, they be like, oh, you can't eat. She's like, oh no, she can. Yes, she can. She's telling me all the time, right? So, like
Mhm.
you said, you have to be, and praise God if you have a doctor like yourself who is like, look, I'm on your side, right? My
Mhm.
my thought process is we we need to get you in here. How do we get you out better than you came in, right?
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
what it's all about, man. So I
Hmm.
appreciate you for your time. Uh,
Hmm.
family, we time has been well spent. We are almost at the end of our time, 15 minutes left. Dr. Mba, what we do on the STEM files, at least recently, is we try to turn the table a little bit. We allow for the guests to ask a
Oh,
couple questions and play interviewer, if you will, for us, right? So at this time, if you have any questions, would like to ask me anything about the STEM files, my
mhm.
personal how we got here, or anything, the floor is yours to do so.
Okay. Yes. So, I I'm always really interested in, you know, how and one in people's stories, but really in what drives them to do what they do. So I'm really interested in the story, what birthed the STEM files. Where how did you and Tariq decide to start this and start reaching out with this kind of with this podcast and with this sort of drive for education and highlighting us in STEM.
Absolutely. So it all goes back to the parent company of the STEM Files, which is Original Man Scientific
Mhm.
LLC, which is a science and technology company geared towards delivering the advantages of research and development to your community. We knew that in order to do that, one of the things we have to do is grow our own network, build interconnectedness amongst ourselves, community around the nation and beyond, and be able to now be able to pick each other's brains, highlight, and also promote the things that we were doing. So we said,
Okay.
hey, we're going to start a podcast. It was first on Blog Talk, and now being on YouTube, a hiatus for a year, but it's been about 5 years that we've been doing this. But
Mm.
you know, what we understood is black being black in STEM is one thing, but black has always been STEM, being the mothers and fathers of civilization, teaching high level mathematics and sciences since the beginning of time, and right, and being able to understand that we have always been in the picture.
Mhm.
I've never struggled to see myself in the picture because I know that I'm in the picture, I made the
Yeah.
camera, you know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
So we
Gotcha.
want people to understand
Mhm.
that we've always been here. We've been doing it at a high level. We're doing it in ways that you may not represent STEM. I've had people tell me all the time, "You don't seem like an engineer." I said, "Why?" Because I have a different way of dressing. I may use a colloquialism now and again, or I was homeschooled and I'm not functionally, weird in terms of my interactions with people, right? So we want to show people what STEM looks like.
All right.
STEM
Wow.
looks like the hip hop MD,
Mhm.
Maynard Okereke.
Yeah.
The STEM looks like Brother Tariq, who reps his Navy Bean research. STEM looks
Mhm.
like you, remember?
Yeah.
STEM looks
All
like
right.
Doc Mary Payton, right? So this is what STEM looks like, and we wanted to make sure we promoted that at a high level and made the world even smaller when it came to Black in STEM.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic, man. I love that. I love that story. I love to hear it. And and having known Tariq for wow for a long time now, I'm really edified to see the both of you here doing in this space, and I'm really excited about what you guys got going on here. So, in terms of the rest of it, I actually was kind of interested in gauging, where well how do I put this? See, I wasn't prepared to be an interviewer today.
Take your time.
So you know I guess I really wanted to know, in terms of what I do, what the understanding was in terms of diabetes and things of that nature. What did was your understanding of diabetes before we had this conversation? Like, did you know exactly what it did? Did you have some stigmas surrounding it, or some things you hopefully didn't understand but you understand a little better now?
Definitely the latter. I knew that there
Hmm.
were two types. I knew that they were
Hmm.
slightly different as it pertains to things like insulin. But being that my background isn't in medicine, I rely a lot on obviously like looking things up, and obviously Tariq being having that background knows a lot more than me. So
Hmm.
you know, on the STEM files, we want to represent the breadth of STEM.
Hmm.
And And I always love both me and Tariq are on, and we have somebody in our respective fields. Maybe a mechanical engineer comes on, a material scientist comes on, structural engineer comes on. Now a
Mhm.
epidemiologist comes on, or a cardiologist or someone in forensic science comes on that's closer to like the medical side of things. So we're able to appreciate the energy that we as someone who's also in that field responds with. So for me, it was, I have a general understanding, but I'm always wowed at how people who this is their expertise are able to articulate to the quote unquote layman what it is that they understand so that now I can understand. Yes, I'm technically
Right.
savvy. I have a background in a technical
Sure.
career path, but this is
Hmm.
not my expertise. So, like the Honorable
Hmm.
Minister Farrakhan always talks about when he talks about people being his master in one way or another, right? I'm
Hmm.
not the best at everything, so I can always
Right.
learn. So as long as I maintain that student mentality, I'll always grow, and I can get an
Absolutely.
appreciation of other people. So that's kind of where I was when it came
Hmm.
to you, and how I try to stay when it comes to anybody that we bring on.
Well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate the work you guys are doing in this space. And I really do appreciate it as somebody who is in STEM, who is married to somebody in STEM, and it's really nice. It's really nice to see that there are these kind of communications going on, and that we can hopefully bridge a gap for folks that have have a desire to learn, or really just are interested in the job, interested in sort of the knowledge behind where these fields look like, and whether it's how to get there or simply just what we do. Having an opportunity to talk about it really what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it it makes me very happy. It fills me with a lot of hope, and it obviously, and it's nice to know that this community is here.
Absolutely, man. And I
Hmm.
want to highlight Carol Johnson. Thank you so much. And I would love some 20 Dr. Uzos. Listen,
Oh, well, thank you
believe it or
very
not,
much.
they're around. They're
Mhm.
around. We just gotta get
We
them in
are.
one room and take a
There
picture,
you go.
right?
That's the thing. We got to get in the
But
room or on the
here at the
Zoom,
STEM
one of the
Files,
way.
we're trying to do that. We're trying to
Mhm.
let you know, hey, they're here. This is how you get in contact with them. This is inspiration for you, whatever it is you do. Doc, one of the things that we also like to do, not everybody's interested in science in a fundamental sense, right? In the
Hmm.
traditional sense.
Sure.
But the scientific mindset, that problem solving, critical thinking mindset can and should be applied to anything of value you do. So we want to expose people to the mind of a scientist so then they can approach life as a scientist, right? The scientist
Hmm.
is curious. The
Right.
scientist looks at failure as a stepping stone. The scientist studies. The scientist is consistent, right? These are universal principles that are success principles for any and everything that you do. So we can marry every individual, or most individuals who watch the STEM files, marry them with a healthy understanding and then the mindset of a scientist. We feel like we've done our job and done it pretty well, right?
It's
So
fantastic. Absolutely.
um, with that, I always like to have the guests leave some nuggets, right? So, what is one or two things you want people to know, right? You have to explore anything from, it could be about mentorship, it can be about STEM and how to pursue what you've done, never giving up anything. Just what do you want them to know and leave with as we close?
Um, okay, so a couple of things. First, as it relates to diabetes, there are somewhere between 35 and 40 million people in the United States with some type of diabetes. So it is much more common than you think. Literally 1 in 10 people in the country has or suffers from it. And it's not all because they didn't do the right things. It's not all because they ate the wrong things or whatnot. A lot of it just has to do with circumstances of genetics, autoimmune issues, and and their body's own capacity to produce insulin. So I think if I wanted to get one thing out about having diabetes, is that we should try to erase the stigma behind having it and recognize it as something that can be treated. And that the fact is, if you treat it well and you treat it early, that none of the consequences that we are so familiar with, you're not going to lose a foot, you're not going to go blind, you're not going to have a kidney transplant, you're not going to have a heart attack. If
Talk.
you get it under control, like
Right.
that's the key. And so all you do, even if you don't have a doctor that's like me, Your doctor is trying to do what they can to lower your risk for any problems from the diabetes. So when they talk about your lab values and they talk about your blood sugars and all these other things, it's really just about making sure we limit the risk for complications, because you know what's worse than having diabetes? Losing a foot. You know what's worse than having diabetes? Having a heart attack. All those things, if we can avoid them, we absolutely should. So we use every arrow in our quiver: diet, lifestyle, exercise, medications, pharmaceuticals, holistic, whatever it is. Use every arrow in the quiver to make sure that you keep that risk nice and low so you can have your very best life going forward. So if you leave with nothing else, I want you to leave with that, as it relates to diabetes. And as it relates to, science and whatnot, regardless of what the pursuit is, if you know somebody who's young that is interested in science, who is interested in engineering, who is interested in math, technology, heck, even if it's the arts,
Right.
find the thing that they love and nurture it. If it is your child, find the thing that they love and nurture it. If it's your niece, your nephew, your cousin, help them nurture those things that they love, because having people in their circle that they know are going to be supportive of the things they do is so, so valuable to a young person coming up. I know it was to me, and I very much hope that I can be that to the people in my circle, and and to my son. And so I want to be that to the next generation who's coming up behind me. And so I very much want you to find those people who are around you, find the things that they love and nurture them in it. All right. Of course, as long as it's positive, but in all seriousness, whatever it is that they love, find it and nurture it. You don't have to love it more than they do. You just have to let them know that they're supported.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, you don't have to love it more than they do. You just have to let them know that they are supported. Come on now. Right. Support, man. Go out, lay a firm foundation for the next generation to stand up on. You don't have to give all the answers, but part of the equation should be solved so that I can come back and then finish it out. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It shouldn't be like, I'm on the test, I look at it, then the next person come, it's nothing on there. Like, we gotta fill in something.
Yeah, you gotta leave some of those breadcrumbs behind.
Equation we gotta figure it out. We gotta work it out, man. Gotta work it out.
That's right.
Awesome. Right. Well, with that, last thing we want to do is, where can people get in contact with you? Maybe follow you on social media, see some of the work that you do.
So I am notoriously absent on social media. I do have a Twitter account that I use to follow and highlight a lot of science, sports and politics and stuff that I'm into, but mostly the people I follow on Twitter, at least from a professional and science standpoint, have a lot to do with folks who are doing work in the endocrinology and the endocrinology, diabetes, and obesity space. So, if you follow me, you're going to see a few retweets of some really interesting papers and scientific publications regarding some science behind how we metabolize fat, how we burn energy, some new highlights in up and coming medications for the treatment and the control of diabetes.
Awesome.
So follow me on Twitter at Dr. Mba. So yeah.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, like we said, man, time has been well spent. I'm your brilliant engineer, joined by the awesome Dr. Mba. Thank you so much, bro, for coming on. Listen,
thank you so much for having me.
Platform. The next time you have anything more to share, part 2 is waiting for you. So just you already know Tariq and everything. Get in contact with us. We would love to have you back. Family, we pray you enjoyed, you were enlightened, you were inspired. And if there's one thing that I want to give you before we close, is remember, if this has always been the case, Black is STEM. All right?
That's right, brother.
Until next time, family. Love y'all much. This has been the STEM Files. Peace.